I was folding my grandson's tiny Superman shirt, the one I'd saved up my pension money to buy him for his 8th birthday, when I heard her voice slice through the air like a knife through my heart. Marina, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my home, into my life, into my family with open arms and unconditional love. "She's too old to be watching him," she hissed to my son in the kitchen, each word a poison dart aimed straight at my soul. What if something happens? What if she falls? What if she forgets to feed him? My hands went numb. The shirt slipped through my fingers as tears blurred my vision. Too old? Me? The same grandmother who had been there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every middle-of-the-night fever? The same woman who held Lucas in her arms the day he was born and whispered promises to always protect him? I stood there in the hallway of my own home, the home I'd worked my entire life to build, and felt my world crumbling beneath my feet. In that devastating moment, I realized that the family I had sacrificed everything for was about to betray me in the cruelest way imaginable. If you're watching this, please, from the bottom of my broken heart, like this video and subscribe to my channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I need to know there are still people out there who understand what it means to be thrown away by the ones you love most. What I'm about to share may sound like something from a nightmare, but I swear on my late husband's grave, every single word is the painful truth. My name is Elena. I'm 68 years old, and I thought I had survived the worst life could offer. I buried my soulmate, my beloved husband of 42 years, and felt my heart torn in half. I raised 2 children alone, working double shifts at the hospital until my feet bled and my back screamed in agony, just to make sure they never went to bed hungry. I've endured poverty, loneliness, and grief that would have broken weaker souls. But standing in that hallway listening to my own son stay silent while his wife tore me apart, that was a pain unlike anything I'd ever known. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the betrayal that was festering inside my own family. Wearing the sweet smile of the woman my son chose to marry, the sound of Marina's voice that evening carried something I'd never heard before. A cold calculation that made my blood run cold. She wasn't just criticizing my age. She was building a case against me, brick by brick, word by word. "Lucas needs younger energy," she continued, and I could hear my son's hesitant responses, the way his voice grew quieter with each of her arguments. "Your mother means well, David, but she's from a different generation. She doesn't understand child safety the way we do now." As I stood there in the dim hallway, clutching my grandson's clothes to my chest, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who had welcomed Marina into our family with open arms, who had spent thousands of dollars helping them furnish their first apartment, who had rearranged her entire retirement to be available for babysitting duty, that trusting woman began to die. In her place, a different Elena was being born, one who would question everything and trust nothing at face value. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Marina, barely 35 years old, questioning my capability when she'd been the one calling me every morning for the past 2 years, begging me to watch Lucas while she handled important errands. She'd never seemed concerned about my age when she needed free childcare so she could spend her days at the spa or shopping with friends. But now, suddenly, I was too old, too unreliable, too dangerous to be trusted with the most precious thing in my world. I remembered the look in Lucas's eyes that very afternoon when I'd picked him up from school. He'd been quieter than usual, his normally bright chatter replaced by thoughtful silence. When I'd asked him what was wrong, he'd simply said, "Grandma, Marina says I can't tell you some things anymore. She says it's between us." At the time, I'd brushed it off as typical adult-child boundaries. But now those words took on a sinister meaning that made my stomach clench with worry. The conversation in the kitchen continued, and I found myself pressing closer to the wall, straining to hear every word. Marina's voice had taken on that syrupy, sweet tone I'd come to recognize as her manipulation voice, the same one she used when asking me for money or favors. "I'm not saying your mother is incompetent," she purred. "I'm just saying that Lucas is getting older, more active. He needs someone who can keep up with him, someone who understands modern parenting techniques. Modern parenting techniques. The phrase made me want to laugh if the situation weren't so devastating. I'd raised 2 successful children, worked as a pediatric nurse for 30 years, and had been caring for Lucas since the day he was born. I'd walked the floors with him during colicky nights when Marina was too exhausted to function. I'd been the one to teach him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, to read his first words. But apparently, none of that mattered because I'd had the audacity to age. What Marina didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that she'd just declared war on the wrong grandmother. I'd spent my entire life protecting the people I loved, and I wasn't about to stop now. As I stood there in the growing darkness of my hallway, still clutching Lucas's clothes, I made a silent promise to myself and to my grandson. I would find out what Marina was really up to, because women like her didn't work this hard to isolate a child from a loving grandparent without having something to hide. The house fell silent as their conversation ended, and I heard the front door close as Marina left for one of her mysterious evening appointments. My son appeared in the hallway, his face drawn with stress and confusion. "Mom," he said softly, "we need to talk." But I was already several steps ahead of him, my mind racing with questions that needed answers, and a growing certainty that my daughter-in-law was not the woman she pretended to be. Looking back now, I realized that moment in the hallway was when everything changed. It was when I stopped being a naive grandmother who assumed the best in everyone and started being a woman who understood that sometimes the greatest threats to our families come from within. Marina thought she was pushing an old woman aside, but what she was actually doing was awakening a force she was completely unprepared to handle. Before I tell you how this story ends, let me take you back to the beginning, to show you just how far we'd all fallen from the happiness we once knew. Because understanding how we got to that devastating conversation requires understanding what Marina had systematically destroyed, piece by piece, smile by smile, lie by lie. My family used to be something beautiful, something that filled me with such pride I could barely contain it. When my husband Robert was alive, our house was the center of everything. Sunday dinners that lasted for hours, holidays that brought extended family from 3 states away, birthday parties that spilled out into the backyard and made the neighbors smile just from hearing the laughter. Robert and I had built something precious together, a legacy of love and togetherness that I thought would outlast us both. David, my youngest son, had always been the gentle one, the child who brought me flowers he'd picked from neighbors' gardens when he was 5 years old, who called me every day during his college years just to check in. When he told me he'd met someone special, someone who made him laugh and shared his love of hiking and old movies, I was overjoyed. At 38, David deserved to find love again after his first marriage had ended amicably, but sadly, due to incompatibility. When Marina first walked into our family gathering 3 years ago, she seemed like everything David needed. She was beautiful in an understated way, with warm brown eyes and a laugh that seemed genuine. She asked thoughtful questions about our family traditions, complimented my cooking, and spent 20 minutes looking through photo albums with genuine interest. She told us about her work as a marketing consultant, her travels through Europe in her 20s, her close relationship with her sister in California. Everything about her seemed perfect, perhaps too perfect, though I ignored that small voice of caution in the back of my mind. The early months of their relationship were a whirlwind of double dates, family barbecues, and holidays where Marina seemed to blend seamlessly into our traditions. She brought thoughtful gifts, remembered everyone's birthdays, and always offered to help with dishes or cooking. When David announced their engagement after just 8 months of dating, I pushed down my concerns about the speed of everything and focused on planning the beautiful backyard wedding that Marina said she'd always dreamed of. I spent $12,000 of my own savings on that wedding, $12,000 that came from the fund Robert and I had carefully built for our golden years together, money that was supposed to help me maintain my independence as I aged. But Marina had such specific visions, such heartfelt explanations about wanting everything to be perfect for David, that I found myself writing check after check for flowers, catering, decorations, and even Marina's wedding dress, when her family financial situation turned out to be more complicated than she'd initially revealed. "Elena," she'd said, tears in her eyes as we sat in my kitchen planning the reception menu. I never had a mother who cared enough to make my dreams come true. You're giving me the wedding I never thought I'd have. How could I resist that? How could any mother-in-law resist a daughter-in-law who seemed so grateful, so genuine in her appreciation for being welcomed into our family? The wedding was indeed beautiful. Marina glowed with happiness. David looked more content than I'd seen him in years, and even I felt hopeful about our family's future as I watched them exchange vows under the oak tree Robert had planted when David was born. In my naivety, I thought the financial sacrifice had been worth it to see my son so happy, to welcome a daughter I'd never had into my heart. When Lucas came along 2 years later, I thought my life was complete. After Robert's death, the house had felt so empty, so quiet, that some days I'd find myself talking to his picture just to hear a human voice. But suddenly, I had this perfect little grandson who needed me, who lit up when I walked into the room, who called me Gamma in his sweet toddler voice. David and Marina both worked demanding jobs, so it was natural that I became Lucas's primary caregiver during the day. Those early years with Lucas were the happiest I'd been since losing Robert. We had our routines: breakfast at my kitchen table while we watched cartoons, afternoon walks to the park where he'd collect special rocks for his treasure box, evening baths where he'd create elaborate soap bubble stories. I read him the same bed books I'd read to David, taught him the songs my own grandmother had sung to me, and watched him grow from a curious toddler into a bright, loving little boy. Marina seemed genuinely appreciative of my help during those years. She'd hug me goodbye each morning when she dropped Lucas off, bring me flowers on random Tuesdays, and always insisted I join them for dinner at least twice a week. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Elena," she'd say, and I believed her completely. I thought I'd found the daughter I'd always wanted, the perfect daughter-in-law who appreciated everything I brought to their family. I invested everything I had in their happiness. When they wanted to buy a house but couldn't qualify for the mortgage they needed, I co-signed the loan and put up $15,000 for the down payment. When Marina's car broke down and they couldn't afford the repairs, I bought her a reliable used car for $8,000. When Lucas needed expensive medical tests for a health scare that turned out to be nothing serious, I paid the $3,000 deductible without hesitation. Looking back now, I can see how systematically Marina had been setting up my financial dependence on their gratitude. Every major expense became my responsibility, always presented as temporary help that they'd pay back as soon as possible, though somehow there was always another crisis that made repayment impossible. But at the time, I saw it as the natural give and take of family life. The way Robert and I had been helped by our parents and had helped our children in return. Our Sunday dinners became the highlight of my week. Marina would cook elaborate meals, David would tell stories about his work adventures, and Lucas would chatter nonstop about school, friends, and whatever new interest had captured his imagination. We'd play board games after dinner, watch family movies, and sometimes I'd stay so late that I'd end up sleeping in their guest room. Those evenings made me feel like Robert was smiling down on us, proud of the family legacy we'd built together. The photo albums from those years tell the story of what I thought was our golden age. Pictures of Lucas's birthday parties in my backyard, Christmas mornings where he'd run between our houses opening presents, family vacations to the beach where 3 generations built sandcastles and collected seashells. In every photo, Marina's smile looks genuine, her arm around my shoulders, her eyes bright with what I interpreted as love and gratitude. I remember the exact moment when I thought Marina and I had truly bonded as mother and daughter. It was last spring, during one of our Saturday shopping trips. Lucas was at a friend's birthday party, and Marina had suggested we spend the day together, just the two of us. We'd gone to lunch at a little cafe downtown, then spent the afternoon browsing antique shops and talking about everything from David's childhood to her dreams for Lucas's future. "Elena," she'd said as we sat on a bench in the town square, watching elderly couples feed ducks in the pond, "I want you to know how much you mean to me. My own mother was never present the way you are. You've shown me what real maternal love looks like, and I'm so grateful Lucas gets to grow up with that kind of grandmother. I'd actually cried right there on the bench, thinking about how blessed our family was, how perfectly everything had worked out. That conversation happened just 6 months ago. 6 months before Marina would stand in my kitchen and systematically dismantle everything I thought we'd built together. 6 months before I'd discover that every warm word, every grateful hug, every family moment I'd treasured had been part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me compliant, while Marina executed a plan I never could have imagined. The woman I'd welcomed as a daughter, the woman I'd trusted with my grandson and my financial security, the woman I'd defended to concerned friends who worried I was being too generous. That woman had never existed at all, but I didn't know that yet. I was still living in the beautiful illusion Marina had created, still believing that family meant something, still trusting that the people you love would never deliberately hurt you. The first crack in that illusion came on a Tuesday morning in late September, and it was so small I almost missed it entirely. The morning started exactly like hundreds of others over the past 6 years. Marina dropped Lucas off at my house at 7:30, kissed my cheek, and told me she'd be back by 5 to pick him up. "I have meetings all day," she'd said, though I noticed she was dressed more casually than usual, jeans and a flowing blouse rather than her typical professional attire. "Thanks for watching him, Elena. You're a lifesaver as always." Lucas seemed different that morning, quieter than his usual energetic self. While I made his favorite breakfast of blueberry pancakes, he sat at the kitchen table drawing abstract patterns in his notebook instead of chattering about his upcoming school presentation like he'd been doing all week. When I asked him about it, he simply said, "Marina told me not to bother you with school stuff anymore. She says you have enough to worry about." The comment struck me as odd, but not alarming. Perhaps Marina was trying to teach Lucas to be more independent, more considerate of others' time. I made a mental note to mention to her that I loved hearing about his school projects, that it was never a burden, but then got distracted by the morning routine of getting him fed, dressed, and ready for our day together. It was when we were walking to the park that I noticed the first real sign something was wrong. Lucas kept looking over his shoulder, scanning the street behind us with an anxiety that seemed inappropriate for an 8-year-old's morning walk. When I asked him what he was looking for, he said, "Marina says I should always check if people are following us. She says there are bad people who might want to hurt our family." This stopped me cold. In all my years of raising children and grandchildren, I'd never taught them to be paranoid about random strangers following them in our safe suburban neighborhood. Yes, we talked about stranger danger and staying close to trusted adults, but this level of vigilance seemed excessive and frankly disturbing for a child his age. "Did something happen, sweetheart?" I asked gently, kneeling down to his eye level. "Did someone scare you or Marina?" Lucas shook his head quickly, but his eyes darted away from mine. "No, nothing happened. Marina just says it's important to be careful. She says," he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "She says grown-ups have secrets that kids don't understand, and sometimes bad people try to use kids to get to those secrets." The conversation was making my skin crawl, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. On the surface, Marina's advice wasn't unreasonable. We do live in a world where children need to be cautious. But something about the way Lucas was repeating her words, the nervous energy in his small body, suggested there was more to this story than general safety awareness. We continued to the park, where Lucas played with his usual enthusiasm, but I found myself watching him more carefully than usual. I noticed how he checked the playground entrance every few minutes, how he stayed closer to me than normal, how he seemed to relax only when we were sitting together on the bench feeding the ducks. Whatever Marina had told him about danger, it had clearly made a lasting impression. The second strange incident happened that afternoon, when Marina came to pick him up. She was 30 minutes later than usual, which wasn't completely unusual given her unpredictable work schedule. But when she arrived, she seemed flustered and kept checking her phone while Lucas gathered his backpack and jacket. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Client meeting ran long, you know how it is." But as she spoke, I caught a whiff of perfume that seemed too strong for a business meeting, and I noticed her lipstick had been freshly applied. Again, nothing definitive, but small details that didn't quite add up to the story she was telling. As they were leaving, Lucas hugged me goodbye with extra intensity, the kind of hug that usually meant he was sad about something, but didn't know how to express it. "I love you, Gamma," he whispered into my neck, and I felt him hesitate before adding, "Don't forget about me, okay?" The comment was so unlike him, so unnecessarily anxious, that I immediately asked, "Why would I ever forget about you, sweetheart? You're my favorite boy in the whole world." He pulled back to look at my face, studying it with 8-year-old seriousness. "Marina says sometimes old people forget things, and sometimes they forget people too. She says that's why it's important for me to have other people who can take care of me." Marina, who had been impatiently jangling her keys by the door, suddenly became very still. "Lucas," she said in a voice that was carefully controlled, "I told you that was just general information about aging. I wasn't talking about Grandma Elena specifically," but Lucas looked confused, as if that wasn't how he remembered the conversation. "But you said—" "I said we needed to go," Marina interrupted, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard her use with Lucas. "Elena, thanks again for watching him. I'll call you tomorrow about this weekend." They left quickly after that, Marina practically pulling Lucas out the door before he could finish whatever he'd been about to say. I stood at my front window watching their car disappear down the street, feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Nothing that had happened was overtly wrong, but everything felt slightly off, like a picture hanging crooked on the wall. Not dramatically obvious, but persistent enough to bother you once you noticed it. That evening, I called my older son, Michael, who lived 2 hours away with his own family. Michael had always been my practical child, the one who analyzed situations carefully before making judgments. I told him about the day's strange conversations, trying to keep my voice light and avoid sounding like a paranoid grandmother reading too much into innocent interactions. "Mom," Michael said after listening to my concerns, "that does sound a little weird. I mean, why would Marina be talking to Lucas about old people forgetting things? And the stuff about strangers following them seems over the top for a kid his age. But maybe I'm overreacting," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I didn't quite believe them. "Maybe she's just being cautious and I'm reading too much into it because I'm getting older and more sensitive about aging comments. Or maybe," Michael said gently, "your instincts are telling you something important. You've been around kids your whole life, Mom. You know what normal anxiety looks like versus something more concerning." Has Marina been acting differently lately? More stressed or secretive? Now that he mentioned it, Marina had been different over the past few months. More distracted during our conversations, quicker to end phone calls, less available for our usual family dinners. When I'd attributed it to work stress or the normal challenges of raising a school-aged child, but maybe there was something more significant happening. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just feel like something's not right, but I can't point to anything specific enough to justify making waves about it." "Trust your gut," Michael advised. "And maybe pay closer attention over the next few weeks. If something is going on, it'll probably become clearer with time." That night, I lay awake thinking about the day's conversations, replaying Lucas's words and Marina's reactions in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Lucas had been trying to tell me something important, something Marina clearly didn't want him to share. But what could an 8-year-old know that would require such careful management of his words? The thought that kept circling back, the one that made my chest tight with worry, was Marina's comment about old people forgetting things and forgetting people. Why would she plant that seed of doubt in Lucas's mind about my memory or reliability? What purpose did it serve except to make him question whether he could trust me, whether I would always be there for him? As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to start paying much closer attention to Marina's behavior, to the things she said and did when she thought no one was watching. If my daughter-in-law was trying to manipulate my relationship with my grandson, I was going to find out why. And if she thought she could undermine me by playing on fears about my age and memory, she was about to learn just how sharp and determined this old grandmother could be. The investigation that began the next morning would ultimately reveal betrayals so deep and calculated that they would shatter not just my trust in Marina, but my understanding of how truly evil someone could be while wearing the mask of family love. Over the next 2 weeks, I began documenting everything with the methodical precision I'd learned during my nursing career. I started a small notebook where I recorded times, dates, conversations, and observations. Not because I was planning anything dramatic, but because I wanted to determine whether my growing unease was based on real evidence or just the paranoia of an aging woman who was feeling insecure about her place in the family. The patterns that emerged were subtle but consistent. Marina had begun making small comments about my capabilities in front of Lucas, always framed as concern rather than criticism. "Make sure you hold Grandma's arm when you're walking downstairs, sweetie. We want to keep her safe. Don't run ahead at the store, Lucas. Grandma needs to be able to keep up with you. Help Grandma remember to take her vitamins. Sometimes older people forget important things." Each comment, taken individually, could be interpreted as thoughtful care, but together, they formed a pattern of undermining that was designed to make Lucas see me as frail and unreliable, rather than as the competent caregiver I'd always been. Marina was systematically rewriting the narrative of our relationship, positioning herself as the responsible adult protecting both Lucas and me from my own limitations. I also began paying closer attention to Marina's schedule and her explanations for where she spent her time. The discrepancies were small but noticeable. She'd mentioned client meetings that seemed to happen at odd hours, 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, 9 a.m. on a Saturday. She'd referenced business trips that required her to be out of town overnight, but when I casually asked David about them later, he seemed unaware that she'd been traveling for work. Most concerning were the changes in Marina's financial behavior. She'd always been somewhat secretive about money, explaining that she handled all the family finances because David was too trusting and needed protection from his own generous impulses. But lately, she'd been asking more specific questions about my own financial situation, how much the house was worth, whether I had life insurance, what my monthly expenses were. "I just want to make sure you're secure, Elena," she'd say during these conversations. "David and I worry about you living alone in such a big house. Have you considered downsizing? Maybe moving into one of those nice senior communities where you'd have help if you needed it?" The suggestion was presented as loving concern, but it felt like pressure. When I mentioned that I wasn't ready to consider assisted living, that I was perfectly capable of maintaining my own home, Marina would smile and say, "Of course you are. I just think it's wise to plan ahead. Don't you?" The breakthrough in my informal investigation came during a conversation with Lucas that happened completely by accident. I was driving him home from school on a day when Marina had claimed to be stuck in a client meeting, and he was chattering about a classmate's birthday party he wanted to attend. "Can you ask Marina if I can go?" he said, then immediately corrected himself. "I mean, can you ask Mom if I can go?" The slip was small, but it caught my attention. "You call her Marina sometimes," I observed gently. "Is that what she prefers?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the passing houses. "She said I should call her Mom because that's what families do, but sometimes I forget. My real mom used to call me Little Star, and Marina doesn't like it when I remember that." I nearly swerved off the road. "Your real mom? Sweetheart? What do you mean?" "The mom I had before," Lucas said matter-of-factly, "before Dad married Marina. But Marina says that Mom wasn't really my mom because she went away, and now Marina is my only mom, and I shouldn't talk about the before mom anymore." My hands were trembling on the steering wheel as pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed began falling into place. David had been married before, briefly, when Lucas was a baby. His first wife had struggled with postpartum depression and had ultimately decided she wasn't ready for motherhood. She'd left when Lucas was just 18 months old, and David had raised him as a single father until meeting Marina. But in all our conversations about family history, Marina had always spoken as if she'd been Lucas's mother from birth. She'd claimed to remember his first steps, his first words, milestones that had happened months before she'd even met David. I'd assumed she was speaking metaphorically, expressing how completely she'd embraced her role as Lucas's stepmother. But apparently, she'd been systematically erasing Lucas's memories of his biological mother and rewriting their family history. "Lucas," I said carefully, "do you remember your first mom?" "A little bit," he admitted. I remember she smelled like flowers and she sang songs in a different language, but Marina says those aren't real memories, that I'm too young to remember anything from when I was little. She says if I keep talking about fake memories, people will think I'm a liar. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Marina wasn't just erasing Lucas's history, she was making him doubt his own memory and experiences. An 8-year-old child was being gaslit by his stepmother into believing his own recollections were lies. Sweetheart, I said, pulling into a parking lot so I could give him my full attention. Your memories are real. If you remember someone who was kind to you, someone who sang to you, those are precious memories, and you should never let anyone tell you they didn't happen. Lucas looked at me with such relief that it broke my heart. Really? So the lady who used to rock me and sing Spanish songs was real? Yes, baby. She was real, and she loved you very much. I didn't know all the details of why David's first wife had left, but I knew it hadn't been because she didn't love Lucas. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that make it hard for them to take care of children. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. We sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes while Lucas told me fragmented memories of his biological mother, the sound of her voice, the way she'd trace letters on his back to help him fall asleep, the colorful bracelets she used to wear that made music when she moved her hands. Each memory was precious and clearly authentic, but Marina had been systematically convincing him they were fabrications. As we drove the rest of the way home, I felt a cold rage building in my chest. Marina wasn't just trying to distance me from Lucas. She was rewriting his entire history, erasing important people and experiences that were part of his identity. But why? What did she gain by making Lucas believe his memories were lies? That evening, after Marina had picked up Lucas with her usual hurried efficiency, I called David. Son, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How much does Marina know about Lucas's early childhood? What do you mean? David asked, though I could hear a note of caution in his voice. I mean about his biological mother, about the things that happened before Marina came into your lives. There was a long pause. Mom, why are you asking about this? Because Lucas mentioned some memories today, and I got the impression that Marina has been telling him those memories aren't real. I want to understand what's happening. Another pause. Longer this time. Marina thinks it's better for Lucas if he doesn't dwell on the past. She says it's confusing for children to have divided loyalties, and that the best thing for him is to focus on the family he has now. But David, those aren't divided loyalties. Those are his memories, his experiences. They're part of who he is. I know, David said quietly. But Marina has some strong feelings about this, and she's studied child psychology. She says that reinforcing memories of a parent who abandoned him could cause long-term psychological damage. I could hear the doubt in my son's voice, the tension between his own instincts and his wife's confident assertions. Marina had convinced him that erasing Lucas's past was an act of protection rather than psychological manipulation. But from my perspective as both a grandmother and a former pediatric nurse, what Marina was doing was deeply harmful to Lucas's developing sense of self and reality. David, I said gently, I think you need to reconsider whether Marina's approach is really what's best for Lucas. A child's authentic memories aren't something to be erased, even if they're complicated. I'll think about it, Mom, he said, but I could tell the conversation was making him uncomfortable. I have to go. Marina's calling me for dinner. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the notebook where I'd been recording my observations. What had started as a vague feeling that something was wrong had become a clear picture of systematic manipulation. Marina was isolating Lucas from his past, undermining his relationship with me, and apparently controlling the narrative of his entire life story. But I still didn't understand her ultimate goal. What did Marina gain by making an 8-year-old boy doubt his own memories, and by convincing his family that his grandmother was too old to be trusted? What was she building toward with all this careful manipulation? The answer would come sooner than I expected, and it would be so much worse than anything I had imagined. 3 days later, Marina made a mistake that would blow her careful facade wide open and reveal the true scope of her deception. But first, I had to endure the most humiliating conversation of my adult life, one that would show me just how completely Marina had poisoned my son's perception of me. The confrontation happened on a Friday afternoon, when Marina came to pick up Lucas earlier than usual. I was helping him with his homework at my kitchen table when she walked in without knocking, something she'd never done before. Her face was flushed with apparent anger, and she was holding her phone in a way that suggested she'd just finished a heated conversation. "Elena," she said without preamble, "we need to talk. Lucas, go watch TV in the living room." Lucas looked between us with obvious anxiety, sensing the tension in Marina's voice. "But I'm not finished with my math," he protested. "Now, Lucas," Marina said sharply, and he quickly gathered his papers and retreated to the living room, shooting me a worried glance over his shoulder. Marina remained standing while I sat at the kitchen table, a position that felt deliberately intimidating. "I just got off the phone with Lucas's teacher," she began, "and she told me something very concerning. She said Lucas has been telling other children that he has a secret mom who used to sing to him, and that his current mom is lying to him about his past." My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "Children process their experiences in their own way, Marina. If Lucas has memories—" "These aren't memories," Marina interrupted, her voice rising. "These are fantasies that someone has been encouraging him to believe. Mrs. Henderson says the other children are confused because Lucas is insisting his family history is different from what David and I have told the school. Maybe because you've been telling him his real memories are lies," I said, my own anger finally rising to match hers. "That child has authentic recollections of his biological mother, and you're making him think he's crazy for remembering her." Marina's face went white, then red. "How dare you interfere with our parenting decisions? How dare you undermine what David and I have decided is best for our son?" "I haven't undermined anything. I simply told Lucas that his memories are real and valid, which they are." "This is exactly what I've been worried about," Marina said, beginning to pace my kitchen. "You're too old to understand modern child psychology. You're filling his head with confusing information that contradicts what his parents have decided is best for him." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I am not too old to understand right from wrong, Marina. And telling a child that his authentic memories are lies is wrong, regardless of whatever psychological theory you're using to justify it. "You're confused, Elena," Marina said, her voice suddenly becoming gentle in a way that was somehow more offensive than her anger. "I know you love Lucas, but you're not thinking clearly about what's best for him. This is exactly why David and I have been concerned about leaving him in your care." "Concerned about what exactly?" Marina sat down across from me, reaching across the table as if to take my hand. I pulled away. "Elena, we've noticed that you've been getting forgetful lately. Little things at first. But now you're actively contradicting what we've told Lucas about his family history. We're worried that you might be experiencing some cognitive decline." The words hit me like ice water. Marina was suggesting that my objections to her psychological manipulation of Lucas were evidence of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. She was pathologizing my valid concerns about her treatment of my grandson and using my age as a weapon against my credibility. "I am not experiencing cognitive decline," I said firmly. "I am experiencing concern about the way you're treating Lucas, and those are two completely different things. I know you believe that," Marina said with false sympathy. "But, Elena, you just spent 20 minutes telling an 8-year-old that his stepmother is lying to him. You encouraged him to believe in memories that contradict his actual family history. If that's not confusion, what would you call it?" I stared at her across my kitchen table, finally seeing her clearly for the first time. Marina wasn't just manipulating Lucas. She was manipulating me, David, and probably everyone else in our orbit. She was rewriting reality to suit her purposes, and then making anyone who questioned her version of events seem unreliable or unstable. "I would call it protecting my grandson from someone who is gaslighting him," I said quietly. Marina's sympathetic mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. "Elena, I think you need to consider whether you're really capable of caring for Lucas anymore. For his safety and your own, maybe it's time to step back from babysitting duties." "Over my dead body." "That's exactly the kind of dramatic, unstable reaction that concerns us," Marina said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. David and I have decided that we need to make other arrangements for Lucas's care. We'll be enrolling him in an after-school program starting Monday. The finality in her voice made my blood run cold. Marina wasn't just questioning my capabilities. She was removing me from Lucas's daily life entirely. After 6 years of being his primary caregiver, of building a relationship that was one of the most precious things in my world, I was being dismissed like an employee who could no longer perform her duties. "You can't do this," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Lucas needs me. I've been caring for him since he was born, and we're grateful for everything you've done," Marina said with false warmth. "But Lucas is growing up, and his needs are changing. He needs caregivers who can keep up with him physically, and who won't confuse him with conflicting information about his family." She called out to Lucas, who appeared in the doorway looking small and worried. "Come on, sweetheart. We need to go home." "But I didn't finish my homework," Lucas protested, looking at me with confusion. "Grandma was helping me with my math." "You can finish it at home," Marina said firmly. "And Lucas, I need you to remember what we talked about regarding family stories. Some things are private family business that we don't discuss with other people." Lucas nodded, but his eyes stayed on my face. I could see him trying to understand what was happening, why the easy comfort of our afternoon had suddenly become tense and complicated. I wanted to hug him, to tell him this wasn't his fault, but Marina was already moving him toward the door. "Elena," Marina said as they reached the threshold, "David will call you this weekend to discuss the new arrangements. I hope you understand that this is what's best for everyone." They left, and I sat alone in my kitchen surrounded by the remnants of Lucas's homework, feeling like my world had just collapsed around me. Marina had played her hand perfectly. She'd made my valid concerns about her treatment of Lucas seem like evidence of my own mental decline, and she'd positioned herself as the reasonable adult protecting a child from his confused grandmother. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something shifted inside me. The grandmother who had been trying to be diplomatic, who had been questioning her own perceptions, who had been afraid to make waves, that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, and infinitely more determined. Marina thought she'd won by removing me from Lucas's daily life. What she'd actually done was give me the motivation and the time to uncover whatever she was really hiding. Because women don't fight this hard to isolate a child from loving family members unless they have something to hide. And I was going to find out exactly what Marina's real game was, even if it destroyed our family in the process. The investigation that began that weekend would reveal a web of deception so intricate and malicious that it would make Marina's psychological manipulation of Lucas seem like child's play in comparison. My real investigation began at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning when I decided to follow Marina during one of her mysterious client meetings. I felt ridiculous sitting in my car outside their house like some kind of private detective, but I was desperate for concrete evidence that my suspicions about Marina were based on more than just hurt feelings and wounded pride. Marina emerged from the house at 8:15. Dressed in the same casual clothes I'd noticed during recent drop-offs, definitely not business attire. She spent several minutes checking her phone and looking up and down the street before getting into her car. Behavior that seemed paranoid for someone heading to a legitimate work appointment. I followed her at a careful distance, grateful for the defensive driving skills Robert had insisted I maintain even in my retirement years. Marina drove across town to an upscale shopping center, where she parked outside a coffee shop and sat in her car for another 10 minutes, still checking her phone repeatedly. At exactly 9 a.m., a man emerged from the coffee shop and approached Marina's car. He was younger than David, probably in his early 30s, with expensive clothes and the kind of confident swagger that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. He slid into Marina's passenger seat, and even from a distance, I could see that their greeting was far more intimate than a business handshake. They stayed in the car for nearly an hour, talking animatedly and occasionally laughing in ways that clearly indicated this was not a professional meeting. At one point, the man reached over and touched Marina's face in a gesture so tender and familiar that it made my stomach turn. My daughter-in-law was having an affair, and she was doing it during the time she was supposed to be working. When they finally got out of the car, They walked into the coffee shop together, sitting at a corner table where they continued their intimate conversation. I managed to get close enough to take a few photos with my phone, though I felt sick doing it. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending my Saturday morning, gathering evidence of my son's marital problems like some kind of amateur spy. But as I watched Marina with this stranger, pieces of her recent behavior began making more sense. The odd working hours, the unexplained absences, the financial pressure she'd been putting on our family. It all pointed to someone who was planning an exit strategy while maximizing what she could take with her. After Marina and her companion parted ways, I followed her to 3 more stops that painted an even more disturbing picture. She went to a bank branch where I watched her through the window, having an intense conversation with a loan officer. Then she visited a real estate office, where she spent 45 minutes in what appeared to be a serious consultation. Finally, she stopped at a legal aid office, emerging with a folder full of documents. The pattern was unmistakable. Marina was preparing for a divorce while keeping David completely unaware of her plans. But more concerning was the timing. Why was she simultaneously working to remove me from Lucas's life while secretly preparing to leave David? What did my relationship with my grandson have to do with her exit strategy? That afternoon, I called my friend Helen, whose daughter worked as a paralegal at one of the law firms downtown. "Helen," I said, "I need to ask you a huge favor, and I need you to trust me that it's important." "What's going on, Elena? You sound terrible." I gave Helen a brief overview of the situation without going into all the details about my surveillance activities. "I think Marina might be planning to divorce David, and I'm worried about what that could mean for Lucas. Is there any way your daughter could discreetly find out if Marina has consulted with any divorce attorneys?" Helen was quiet for a moment. "Elena, that's a pretty serious accusation. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I'm sure something is very wrong, and I need to know what David might be facing before it's too late to protect him and Lucas." 3 hours later, Helen called me back with information that made my blood run cold. "Elena, sit down. According to my daughter's contacts, Marina filed preliminary divorce papers 2 weeks ago. But here's the really concerning part. She's claiming that David is an unfit parent due to his mother's influence over the child. What does that mean?" "It means she's building a case that you're a negative influence on Lucas, possibly due to age-related cognitive issues. If she can prove that David allows his incompetent mother to have unsupervised access to their child, she might be able to get primary custody and limit David's visitation rights." The room spun around me as the full scope of Marina's plan became clear. She wasn't just having an affair and planning to leave David. She was systematically building a legal case that would allow her to take Lucas with her while limiting David's parental rights. And I was the weapon she was using to destroy my own son's chances of keeping his child. Every comment about my age, every suggestion that I was confused or forgetful, every incident she'd documented of me contradicting their parenting decisions. It was all evidence she was collecting to prove that David was irresponsible for allowing me to care for Lucas. She'd turned my love for my grandson into a legal liability that could cost David his child. "There's more," Helen continued. "According to the preliminary filings, Marina is claiming that the family home belongs primarily to her because she's been the primary financial contributor. And she's documented several large financial gifts from you as evidence that David is financially dependent on his mother and therefore unstable. Every dollar I'd contributed to their house, their cars, their emergencies, Marina had reframed all of it as evidence of David's financial irresponsibility rather than family generosity. She'd taken my love and support and weaponized it against my own son. "Helen, is there anything else?" "Yes. And this is the part that really concerns me. Marina has filed documents suggesting that she's worried about your financial exploitation of the family. She's claiming that you've been making inappropriate demands for repayment of gifts and using your financial contributions to control family decisions." I actually laughed, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. Marina had created a complete alternate reality where I was simultaneously an incompetent elderly woman and a manipulative financial abuser. She'd crafted a narrative where every aspect of my relationship with my family was reframed as dysfunctional and harmful. That evening, I sat in my living room staring at the photo albums that documented the last 3 years of our family life together. Every smile in Marina's photos had been fake. Every expression of gratitude had been performance. Every moment of apparent family bonding had been Marina gathering intelligence and building her case for destroying us. But I still didn't understand the financial aspect of her plan. If Marina was planning to leave David, why did she care about my money or my house? The answer to that question would come from an unexpected source and would reveal the most calculating aspect of Marina's scheme. The breakthrough came on Monday morning when Lucas's school called me directly. Mrs. Henderson, his teacher, sounded confused and concerned. "Mrs. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I received some paperwork from Marina about changes to Lucas's emergency contacts, and I wanted to verify something with you." "What kind of changes?" "Well, Marina submitted a form removing you as an authorized pickup person and emergency contact. She also provided documentation from a doctor stating that you've been experiencing memory issues that make you unsuitable for child supervision duties." The room tilted around me. She provided what kind of documentation? "A letter from Dr. Patterson's office indicating that you've been diagnosed with early-stage dementia and that you're no longer considered capable of responsible childcare." Dr. Patterson was my internist, a man I'd seen regularly for 15 years. I'd had my annual physical just 2 months ago, and he'd pronounced me in excellent health for my age. There was no way he would have written such a letter because there was no medical basis for such a diagnosis. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to fax me a copy of that letter immediately. There's been some kind of mistake or misunderstanding." 20 minutes later, I was staring at an expertly forged document on my kitchen counter. The letterhead was perfect, the signature looked authentic, and the language was medical and convincing. According to this letter, I'd been evaluated for cognitive decline after family members expressed concerns about my memory and judgment. The doctor supposedly recommended that I be removed from any caregiving responsibilities and that my family consider arrangements for my own care. Marina hadn't just been building a custody case against David. She'd been creating false medical evidence to support her claims about my incompetence. This wasn't just manipulation or even ordinary fraud. This was systematic identity destruction with forged medical documents. I called Dr. Patterson's office immediately. "Doctor," I said when he came to the phone, "someone has forged a letter using your name and letterhead, claiming that I've been diagnosed with dementia. I need to know if anyone from my family has contacted your office requesting medical information or documentation." Dr. Patterson was silent for a long moment. "Elena, this is very serious. Medical document forgery is a federal crime. I need you to bring me a copy of this letter immediately, and we need to contact the authorities. Before we do that, I need to know, has anyone claiming to be my family tried to get information about my medical records? Let me check with my staff." He put me on hold for several minutes before returning. "Elena, my receptionist says a woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law called about 6 weeks ago, saying she was concerned about your memory and asking about signs of cognitive decline. We told her we couldn't discuss your medical information without your written consent, but she did ask very specific questions about what kind of documentation would be needed to prove someone was incompetent to make their own decisions." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marina had been planning this for months, gathering information about how to forge medical documents that would support her narrative about my mental decline. She'd systematically built a case that would not only cost David his child, but would also potentially allow her to claim that I was incompetent to make financial decisions. That afternoon, I called my attorney and my bank. What I learned during those conversations revealed the final, most devastating aspect of Marina's plan. She wasn't just trying to take Lucas and destroy David's parental rights. She was positioning herself to claim that I'd been making financial decisions while mentally incompetent, which could potentially allow her to challenge every financial transaction I'd made on their behalf over the past 3 years. The house I'd helped them buy, the car I'd purchased for Marina, the thousands of dollars in loans and gifts. All of it could potentially be recovered in court if Marina could prove I'd been suffering from dementia when I'd made those financial decisions. She wasn't just planning to leave David with his child. She was planning to leave him financially devastated and potentially facing legal challenges about money that had already been spent. Marina had spent 3 years systematically positioning herself to destroy my entire family while walking away with everything we'd worked for. but she'd made one crucial mistake in her elaborate plan. She'd underestimated exactly how dangerous it was to threaten someone's grandchild. The next morning, I began making phone calls that would bring Marina's house of cards crashing down around her. But first, I had to confront the woman who had spent 3 years pretending to love my family while planning our systematic destruction. The confrontation I'd been building toward finally happened on a Tuesday afternoon, but not in the way I'd planned. I'd intended to gather more evidence, to build an airtight case before exposing Marina's deception. Instead, she forced my hand by making a move so arrogant and devastating that it left me with no choice but to reveal everything I knew. I was at home organizing the evidence I'd gathered when my phone rang. It was David, and his voice was shaky in a way that immediately put me on high alert. "Mom, I need to come over. There's something we need to discuss, and I need to do it in person." He arrived 20 minutes later with Marina beside him and Lucas nowhere in sight. Marina's face was set in an expression of false sympathy that I now recognized as her manipulation mask. David looked confused and deeply troubled, like someone who'd been forced to make a decision he didn't understand. "Elena," Marina said before David could speak, "we need to talk about your health situation. David and I have been discussing the changes we've noticed in your behavior, and we think it's time to get you some help." "What kind of help?" I asked, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. David finally spoke, his voice heavy with reluctance. "Mom, Marina showed me the letter from Dr. Patterson about your memory issues. I had no idea you'd been having problems, and I'm worried about you living alone." "What letter?" I asked, though I knew exactly which forged document Marina had shown him. Marina pulled out a copy of the fake medical letter and placed it on my coffee table. "Elena, I know this is difficult to accept, but Dr. Patterson has recommended that you be evaluated for residential care. David and I think it would be best if you came to stay with us while we look into suitable facilities." The audacity was breathtaking. Marina was using the forged medical letter to manipulate David into believing I needed to be placed in a nursing home. Once I was declared incompetent and removed from my own home, she'd have unlimited access to my financial resources, while I was locked away somewhere David could be convinced was for my own good. "David," I said carefully, "did you speak directly with Dr. Patterson about this letter?" "Marina handled the medical discussions," he said. "She has a better understanding of healthcare terminology, and she didn't want to worry me unnecessarily." I looked at my son, seeing how completely Marina had isolated him from information about his own mother's health. She'd positioned herself as the expert, the interpreter, the responsible adult who shielded him from difficult truths. David truly believed he was helping me by agreeing to this intervention. "Actually," I said, standing up and walking to my desk, "I think we should call Dr. Patterson right now and discuss this letter together." Marina's composure cracked for the first time. "Elena, that's not necessary. The doctor has already made his recommendations clear." "I insist," I said, picking up my phone. "David, surely you want to hear directly from my doctor about my condition." Before David could answer, Marina stood up abruptly. "This is exactly the kind of paranoid, combative behavior that Dr. Patterson warned us about. Elena, you're not thinking clearly about what's best for you." "Then let's call him and see what he says." I dialed Dr. Patterson's number while Marina watched with growing alarm. When the receptionist answered, I put the call on speaker. "This is Elena Martinez. Is Dr. Patterson available? I have my family here, and we need to discuss a letter he supposedly wrote about my mental health." "Of course, Mrs. Martinez. Please hold while I get him." Dr. Patterson's voice came through the speaker clearly. "Elena, I'm glad you called. I've been trying to reach you about that forged letter you brought to my attention. The FBI is investigating, and they want to speak with you about who might have had access to my letterhead." The silence in my living room was deafening. David's face went white as he stared at the phone, then at Marina, then back at the phone. Marina had frozen completely, her face a mask of shock and calculation. "Dr. Patterson," I said clearly, "my son David is here, and he's been shown a letter allegedly from your office stating that I have dementia and need residential care. Can you please explain to him what your actual assessment of my mental health has been?" "Certainly. Elena, You're one of my healthiest patients. Your last cognitive assessment was perfect. Your physical health is excellent for your age, and I've never had any concerns about your mental acuity. Any letter claiming otherwise is a complete fabrication. David turned to stare at Marina with an expression I'd never seen before, a combination of disbelief, betrayal, and growing rage. "Marina," he said quietly, "what the hell is going on?" Marina's mind was racing, trying to find an explanation that would salvage her position. "There must be some mistake," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe the office mixed up files, or—" "Dr. Patterson," I interrupted. "Can you tell my son about the phone call your office received 6 weeks ago from someone claiming to be my daughter-in-law?" As Dr. Patterson explained Marina's suspicious inquiries about competency documentation, I watched my son's face transform. The confusion gave way to understanding, then to a fury that was terrible to witness. David was realizing that his wife had not only lied to him about my health, but had potentially committed federal crimes to support her deception. When the call ended, the silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Finally, David spoke, his voice deadly quiet. "Marina, I want you to explain to me right now what the fuck is happening." Marina looked between us, calculating her options. I could see her weighing different stories, different explanations that might salvage the situation. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the lies too extensive to explain away. "David," she said finally, "I can explain everything. But first, we need to discuss what's really been going on in this family." "Yes," I said, pulling out the folder of evidence I'd been compiling. "Let's discuss what's really been going on." I placed the photos of Marina with her lover on the coffee table, followed by copies of the divorce papers Helen's daughter had discovered, then the bank records showing suspicious financial activity. Marina's face went from white to gray as each piece of evidence landed in front of David. "What is this?" David whispered, picking up the photos of Marina with the other man. "This is your wife having an affair," I said. "These are the divorce papers she filed 2 weeks ago claiming you're an unfit parent because of my influence over Lucas. And these are bank records showing that she's been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts while building a legal case to take Lucas away from you." David stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "Marina," he said, his voice breaking, "please tell me this isn't real. Please tell me you haven't been planning to take my son away from me." Marina's composure finally cracked completely. "David, you don't understand. Your mother has been poisoning Lucas against me, filling his head with lies about his past. She's been undermining my authority as his parent, and I couldn't let it continue." "So you forged medical documents and planned to have me declared incompetent?" I asked. "You were interfering with my family," Marina exploded, her careful mask finally falling away. "Lucas is my son now, and I won't have some bitter old woman filling his head with fantasies about a mother who abandoned him." The venom in her voice, the casual cruelty with which she referred to me, finally showed David exactly who he'd married. But Marina wasn't finished revealing her true nature. "And yes, I've been seeing someone else," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "Someone who doesn't come with 40 years of baggage and a mother who thinks she owns everyone around her. Someone who can give me the life I deserve instead of this pathetic family drama." "The life you deserve?" David repeated, his voice barely audible. "I've spent 3 years pretending to care about your boring job and your needy mother and your traumatized kid. I've played the perfect wife and stepmother while you and Elena took me for granted. Well, I'm done pretending. I'm taking what I'm owed, and I'm starting over with someone who actually appreciates me." The cruelty was breathtaking, but it was also liberating. Marina had finally revealed exactly who she was, not a confused woman making bad choices, but a calculating predator who had spent 3 years manipulating our family for her own benefit. She'd seen us as marks, not as people she loved. David stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled in a way that suggested he was barely containing his rage. "Get out," he said quietly. "David, we can work this out. We can go to counseling." "Get out," he roared, and Marina actually stepped backward. "Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my life. And if you ever come near my son again, I will destroy you." Marina looked at me with pure hatred. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You couldn't mind your own business, could you? You had to interfere until you ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said calmly. "I just exposed what you'd already done." Marina gathered her purse and headed for the door, but turned back for one final attack. "You think you've won something here? David will never forgive you for destroying his marriage, and Lucas will grow up knowing that his grandmother drove away another mother. You've destroyed this family just to satisfy your own jealousy." After she left, David and I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of 3 years of deception. My son looked broken, aged by the weight of realizing how completely he'd been manipulated and betrayed. "Mom," he said finally, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let her convince me that you were the problem. I should have trusted my instincts about her behavior, and I should have trusted you." We sat in silence for a while, both processing the magnitude of Marina's betrayal. But there was still one crucial question that needed an answer. Where was Lucas? David's face went white when he realized Marina had picked up Lucas for what she'd called ice cream and a movie while we had our confrontation. The realization hit us both at the same time. Marina had Lucas. She knew her plan had been exposed, and she had nothing left to lose. David was reaching for his phone when it rang. Marina's voice was calm, calculating. "I have Lucas with me, and we need to talk about how this is going to work." When David demanded she bring his son home, Marina claimed her legal status as stepmother gave her rights, still trying to gaslight us even with all her lies exposed. "Marina," I said, taking the phone, "you have 2 choices. Bring Lucas home right now, and we handle this through proper legal channels, or continue this game, and I will make sure every crime you've committed over the past 3 years is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." I listed her crimes: medical document forgery, financial fraud, child psychological abuse, and now kidnapping. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Marina's voice lost its confident edge. "Fine," she said. "I'll bring him back. But this isn't over, Elena." 45 minutes later, Marina's car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Lucas in the back seat, confused but unharmed. When she finally walked to the door with Lucas beside her, she looked like a different person. Desperate and cornered, someone who had gambled everything and lost. Lucas ran to me immediately, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Grandma," he whispered. "Marina said we were going on a special trip, but then she kept crying and making phone calls. I want to stay with you and Dad." The week following Marina's exposure was a whirlwind of legal consultations, police reports, and difficult conversations with Lucas. The federal investigation moved quickly once Dr. Patterson provided cooperation. Within days, investigators had traced the fake letterhead back to a print shop where security cameras captured Marina creating multiple versions of the forged document. The evidence was so overwhelming that Marina's own attorney advised her to cooperate rather than fight the charges. The divorce proceedings revealed Marina had systematically moved money out of joint accounts, taken out credit cards in David's name, and attempted to refinance their house without his knowledge. The total theft exceeded $30,000. More importantly, Marina's documented pattern of manipulation and fraud made David's custody case uncontestable. No family court would award custody to a woman facing federal fraud charges, especially when her own legal filings revealed her systematic attempts to alienate a child from his biological family. Beyond the legal victories, the real work was helping Lucas understand what had happened and rebuilding his sense of security. The child who had been systematically gaslit needed careful help to distinguish between his authentic memories and Marina's false narratives. David and I spent evenings encouraging Lucas to share memories about his early childhood and biological mother. Slowly, the confident, chatty boy I remembered began to emerge from the anxious, guarded child Marina had created. David struggled more with the emotional aftermath than Lucas did. The guilt of having been so completely deceived, of having allowed his wife to manipulate his mother and son, weighed heavily on him. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he told me. "How did I let someone manipulate me so completely?" I reminded him that Marina was a professional manipulator, and that he'd been fooled not because he was weak, but because she was expert at making lies seem reasonable and making victims doubt their own instincts. 6 months after Marina's departure, Lucas came to me with a question that showed his healing. "Grandma, my friend Jake's parents are getting divorced, and he's really sad. Should I tell him that sometimes divorce is good?" His wisdom amazed me. He understood that Marina's departure was a relief because she had never truly been part of our family, while Jake's situation was genuinely sad because it involved the breaking of authentic love. Lucas had not only recovered from Marina's manipulation, he'd developed a sophisticated understanding of family relationships. A year later, David began dating Rebecca, a woman who was everything Marina had pretended to be: genuinely warm, interested in Lucas's real thoughts and feelings, respectful of our family history without trying to erase it. When Lucas told her about his memories of his biological mother, she listened with interest. When he showed her pictures of our adventures together, she complimented our bond without suggesting it was inappropriate. David and Rebecca married 6 months ago, and the contrast couldn't be more stark. Rebecca adds to our family's happiness rather than undermining it, and Lucas has grown into a confident, emotionally intelligent child who remembers Marina simply as the lady who lied a lot and made everyone sad, but without trauma or fear. As for me, I learned that the qualities Marina tried to weaponize against me, my age, my close relationship with my grandson, my willingness to question authority, were actually my greatest strengths. The story that you've just heard was modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. I'm not sharing this to encourage you to become suspicious of everyone in your life, but with the hope that someone listening might recognize the signs of manipulation before it goes as far as it did in our family. I really wonder, if you had been in my place, what would you have done? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace, or would you have risked everything to protect your family and reclaim your voice? I want to know your thoughts because every story shared can become a light that illuminates the path for others. God always blesses us, and I'm certain that courage leads us to better days. The people who truly love us will support us when we stand up for what's right, and the people who attack us for protecting our families reveal themselves as unworthy of our trust. If you're currently in a situation where someone is making you doubt your own perceptions, where someone is trying to isolate you from people you love, or where someone is using your age or any other characteristic to undermine your credibility, please trust yourself. Your instincts exist for a reason, and the people who truly care about you will listen to your concerns rather than dismissing them. While we're here together, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 of the channel's favorite stories. I'm sure you'll be surprised by what you find there.